Today we're working on understanding how to work with kids with challenging behaviors. So we're going to do this in two parts. Part one, I'll talk about why behaviors occur, and then we'll get into some of the strategies. So the first thing that I always like to start with is helping people understand that I don't really look at behavior strategies as being right or wrong. Like a lot of times I'll be in a classroom and teachers will say, "Oh, you're watching me and I feel like I'm doing everything wrong." But I really look more at things being effective or ineffective. So in other words, if I have a student that is having some challenging behavior and I'm using a behavior strategy and that behavior is not changing, then I may say that's an ineffective strategy, not right or wrong. So an example that I always give is if I am working, when I was in school, let's say when I was in second grade, I was talking to my friend Cindy the whole time, and I didn't get my math finished. And then the teacher says, "Amy, you didn't get any of your math finished, and you were talking to your friend, so now you have to stay in for recess." I'm pretty sure that I would never have done that again. Like that would have been an effective strategy to take my recess away. However, when I first started teaching, I started teaching in the southern part of Missouri. I was in a small school. I started in January. It was a brand new position because they were getting new kids. And I was given a list of kids with learning disabilities to work with. There are about 12 kids on my caseload. And then I was told that these two kids have lost their recess for the whole rest of the year. So I wouldn't necessarily say that was an effective strategy. Taking recess away that many times probably wasn't changing the behavior. So again, it's not looking at right or wrong. Sometimes people say, "Oh, Amy really doesn't like it when you take recess away." Well, no, I don't like it if you take recess away and it's not working. In other words, the behavior is not changing. So all I want to look at is help you guys understand the difference between behavior strategies that are working and not working so that we can come up with effective strategies that will actually change behavior. So again, it's not right or wrong. It's not like you're doing everything wrong. For some kids, those strategies work great. For other kids, we want to make sure that we're just doing things that are effective. And if it's not, then we just need to change some of the things that we're doing. One of the things to really understand when we first get into looking at changing behavior, especially any kind of problem behavior, is to understand that behaviors are messages. Behaviors tell us something. In other words, the child is trying to communicate something, and that communication is what helps us understand how to change behavior. So the first part is always identifying what those messages are. So there's a number of things that we look at, specifically 4 areas that we oftentimes see when we're talking about behavior strategies. So one of them is called escape. In other words, kids that are using behavior to try to escape oftentimes a demand or a situation or a person. And so a lot of times kids will use behavior because that makes work go away or that makes a person go away. And that's one of the things we oftentimes want to look at in order to figure out what to do about that behavior, because sometimes we're unintentionally reinforcing these behaviors. So for example, let's say a student is in a classroom and the classroom is, moving along, the teacher is teaching math, and all of a sudden that student becomes disruptive. Well, the teacher doesn't want that student to disrupt the other 25 kids, so the child is removed from class. But let's say, for example, the child didn't want to do the math, and so every time the child is disruptive, they're moved to another classroom or moved to the principal's office. What are they not doing in the principal's office? Probably the math. So what happens is we unintentionally reinforce that behavior. The child doesn't want to do math and they're disruptive, and then they're sent to the principal's office. So we need to recognize that, because the next time the child comes into the classroom and someone asks them to do math, what do you think they're going to do? They're probably going to have disruptive behavior because it's working for them. So part of figuring out what to do about those challenging behaviors is understanding the message. What is the message of that particular behavior? And we look at those things by seeing what happens before and after behavior. Now, an example, I've seen a lot of kids that use behavior to try and escape work, especially kids that have a lot of trouble with writing or when math is difficult, and sometimes show some of those escape behaviors. And they can be in the form of refusals, saying I don't want to, or sometimes kids can be aggressive. Sometimes kids can just put their head down and try to sleep. There's lots of different ways that we can see those various behaviors. But I had this student, Tim, and it was so funny. He was doing very, very well in my classroom. I had him for 3 years. I was in a 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade classroom. And the 3rd year in 5th grade, his behavior was much, much better. He was really following directions well. And he had been in my classroom, like a self-contained classroom. So we decided, let's have him go to a general education classroom with a para so he can start to access the curriculum and be around his peers. So we decided for him to go to social studies. It was a class that he liked. And we noticed as we were observing and taking data that during the time the teacher was lecturing or talking about different things that were going on with that particular social studies lesson, he was fine. But then typically the teacher would get out like a paper pencil task where the kids had to then, do something that was kind of reinforcing what they had just learned. And as soon as the paper pencil task came out, he started to be disruptive. And oftentimes he was disruptive enough that we had to remove him from the classroom. So my best guess, as far as looking at the message of the behavior, was that he was trying to escape. As soon as he had to write, and he didn't like to write, he would try to use behaviors that would make him come down to my room. And so I was really looking at that as an escape kind of behavior. Found out it was a little bit something a little bit different. So we were taking data. One of the things that I had in place is I wanted him to earn some reinforcement when he stayed in class. So I had purchased tickets, like just the raffle tickets. And every time he was making good choices with his behavior in this classroom, he got a ticket. And it was for a number of things, like remembering to raise his hand or following directions. And if he stayed in class, he got some tickets as well. There was one particular week, he had a great week. It was awesome. Friday comes along, he had stayed in class the whole week. He earned a bunch of tickets. And so he was in my classroom getting ready to spend his tickets. And I had something that I called a choice book. So page 1 showed you that like 2 tickets will get you this, and then you turn the page and 4 tickets will get you this. So, he's going through, and so he's standing here and he's kind of looking at the book, right? He's turning the pages and he's turning the pages, and his paraprofessional is standing right over here on the left side, kind of watching him. And so he's turning these pages and turning these pages, and then finally he's like, "Hey, Mrs. Bowie, how many of these tickets does it take to get rid of her?" And he pointed at his para. So he wanted to know how to get rid of her. And so the whole time that I'm thinking he doesn't want to do the writing task, I realized what he was actually trying to escape was her. And not that she was doing this terrible job, but in the social studies classroom during the lecture time, she usually sat in the back, and then as soon as the paper pencil stuff came out, she would come over to help him and to work with him. And so he was able to explain to me when I asked the right questions that, hey, I'm the only 5th grader that has this adult that comes over and stands right next to me or sits right next to me, and he didn't like that socially made him look different. And so it was something that when I worked with her, and the paraprofessional, she just thought that was part of her job description. I'm supposed to go help him when I'm in the classroom. But when we set it up that, she doesn't automatically have to go sit by him, and she can help other kids, and kids can raise their hand and the teacher could help him, he had great behavior, even better than when I was trying to use those tickets. So you really have to think about what's going on with the behavior and what's going on in the environment to try to figure out what these messages are and what the function of the behavior. Because again, I thought he was trying to escape the writing, he was trying to escape a person. So that's why oftentimes when we look at our functional behavior assessment, what we call the assessment that we look at when we try to figure out the message of the behavior, that we're really kind of just trying to make our best guess, because it leads to being open to oftentimes seeing, other variables. Like it could be that it was not the work, it was the person that he was trying to escape. So it really helps us to kind of figure out what's going on. So escape is the first one. Another one has to do with sensory, and we oftentimes see this with kids with autism, where some of the behaviors are because they're trying to get some kind of sensory input. You might also hear people describe this as automatic. It's another way that we sometimes describe sensory behaviors. But the sensory behaviors themselves oftentimes give kids some kind of internal stimulation of some sort. So it feels good to them for whatever reason. There's a lot of things. Some of the training that we'll be doing has to do with understanding autism, and we'll get into what some of those sensory systems, but a lot of the sensory systems that kids with autism experience have to do with like understanding where their body is in space and movement, and we sometimes see some rocking and some of those kinds of things. Well, I've seen kids that on the way to the gym, they drop to the ground, and people think, oh, they're trying to escape. They don't really want to go to the gym. But what do we do when a kid drops to the ground? We help them get up. Well, if we help them get up and we're pulling on their arms and helping them, that's something called proprioceptive input, and we're giving them all this input. So sometimes when kids really need some sensory input, if they drop to the ground, we're giving it to them by pulling them back up. So we don't even recognize that the behavior is actually for a sensory component. So again, that's another thing that we need to look at. Could it be that the child is refusing to go to gym and that's why they're dropping? Absolutely. But could it also be that they need some sensory input at that time? Yes. And so that's where our assessment really needs to look at what is the function, because that's going to guide our intervention. For example, if I have a student that's dropping to the ground for sensory input, I might want to figure out a way to give them some sensory strategies versus a child that's refusing to go to PE. Maybe I need to increase reinforcement so that child is more motivated to go to PE. And so that really helps us kind of understand how behavior strategies change by knowing what the function is. Another one, third one, there's four. The third one is tangible. And what we mean by tangible is typically a tangible thing, like an item, a food, activity, toy. So these are kids, they finally get all of their work finished and you say, oh, you want some time on the iPad? Great. But then when the timer goes off, they have to turn the iPad off and things don't go so well. So sometimes turning off preferred activities can be difficult for them. Sometimes kids may have behavior because they want something and the answer is no, they can't have it right now, so they'll have some problem behavior. One example that I give that I think really makes a lot of sense, this was a little girl with autism that I was working with in the home. And I was with a consultant. She and I were in the kitchen talking to mom, kind of what was going on with the behavior, what her little girl was doing. The behavior that was of most concern, she was screaming really loud. And this little girl was 4 years old. She, again, had been diagnosed with autism, but she was completely nonverbal. She didn't have any verbal language at all. And so we were kind of talking to mom, like, when does the screaming occur, and just different kinds of questions. And this little girl was kind of walking around the living room. Again, no language, but still kind of like doing some hand flapping and stuff. And she goes into the kitchen and she screams. Well, we were talking to mom and mom didn't react. She acted like it didn't happen at all. And so we kept talking to mom. The little girl screamed a second time, louder this time. And mom kind of looked at us and she was like, we're supposed to be ignoring this behavior. So we just continued to talk to her. Then the little girl screamed a third time, like really loud this time. So mom immediately gets out her phone, looks at it, and she's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it's already 5 o'clock. I didn't realize we were talking that long. We had lunch at 11, hold on. And she went into the kitchen and fixed her a snack. So what do you think that means for a little girl that has no language, goes into the kitchen, screams 3 times, and Cheez-Its show up? That little girl doesn't have the language to ask for that tangible. She's hungry. She doesn't have the language or the communication skills, and sometimes screaming in the kitchen gets that need met. She gets that tangible. She gets a snack. And so then we look at that behavior. Is the screaming for attention, or is the screaming because I'm hungry? In that situation, it would be for the tangible. It's because she's hungry. And so again, what does that look like when we're looking at behavior strategies? If it's for attention, I'm going to teach her a better way to gain attention. But if it's for that tangible because she's hungry, I'm most likely going to try to teach her some way to communicate when she needs a snack. And so that gives me an idea of what the best intervention is going to be for her. The last one of the 4 talks about attention. And attention is something that we see in a couple of different ways. So some kids just absolutely love attention and talking and interacting, and they love to tell stories, and then sometimes they say things that are funny to try to get a reaction. Sometimes they may be appropriate, sometimes they're not, but kids really like to interact. We had this little girl that started with us at the Center for Autism Education, the school that I opened, and she came in, she was a middle school student. She had no behavior when she was one-on-one. All of our students are one-on-one because of the behavior, but she was very talkative and loved to interact with people. She started right around her birthday, and she had just gotten this purple watch, and we had to stop in the hallway and tell people about the watch and show them the watch, and she was just very, very happy and interacting with everybody. And towards the end of the first week when she started with us, she was doing some academic work, and it was specifically math. And I noticed that one of her IEP objectives said that she would do her math independently. And she was doing this addition, and she knew it, like she was doing very, very well. So we thought, here's a great opportunity to see how she does on this goal. So again, so far everybody had kind of been interacting with her, and now she's doing her math. So we said, okay, Susie, go ahead and do the next 2 problems by yourself. And we stepped away. The minute we stepped away, she swiped everything off her desk and started using the F word. Well, in middle school, what do you think happens when you swipe everything off your desk and use the F word? Someone comes over, right? There's somebody comes and reacts to that. So for her, as soon as the attention went away, she used behavior that made the attention come back. And so that was something that was working for her. So yes, sometimes kids will have various behaviors because of the reaction that they get, because someone responds to it. At some point in these trainings, we're going to be talking about planned ignoring and how you can make sure that you're not responding to it in a way that maintains that behavior or gives attention for that behavior. But oftentimes with some kids, if they hit and you say don't hit, telling them not to hit attended to that behavior. It gave them attention, and it might reinforce them that the next time they want some attention, they're going to hit. So again, this is what guides us to come up with the best strategies and the best interventions. Now, besides that piece of, really trying to get somebody to interact, especially like when they're left alone or somebody walks away, they use behaviors to get that person to come back. The other thing that I will see sometimes, and I think about this in terms of looking at the attention function, is that behaviors will sometimes happen, and I kind of think of it as being a reaction. So I'll have kids that, maybe you said no to something and they don't like that, or you're asking them to do work and they're refusing, but now they're getting into all of these behaviors to try to get a reaction. I'll have kids that they'll go stand on a chair. They'll try to pull something off the wall. They'll, run because that makes somebody chase them. And so they're doing all of these things. And you can oftentimes see kids using these behaviors to try to get a reaction because, I had this little guy and he would say, well, that's a bunch of crap, not the most appropriate thing. He was a kindergarten student. And they would say, Joey, you can't say crap. And he's like, but it's crap, and he'd smile and laugh. And you could tell that by saying that he was getting a reaction. So what that means is we can't give that same reaction or we're reinforcing behavior. And what I mean by that is every time we reinforce behavior, it means that it makes it stronger. It makes it more likely to happen again. And if that's the case, then we need to be very careful about not doing that and changing our reaction so that the behavior doesn't get reinforced and it goes away, especially if we're looking at problem behavior that we don't want anymore. So any challenging behavior that persists over time is working for the child. We really have to be careful not to let behavior kind of get under our skin and take it personally. It's working for them in some way. I always tell people I had a student that he came in to do math. The teacher said, here's a math worksheet, and he hit her in the face. He had to go sit in timeout. That's what the teacher had all of the kids. They had to go sit in timeout whenever they had a behavior that was not good, which hitting would obviously not be a good behavior. So he's over here on the blue couch because he's in timeout, but I'm watching him. He's not doing his math, right? He was supposed to do his math, and now he's not doing it. He's over there like he was all leaned back on the couch and had a big smile on his face. Kids were walking by. He was trying to trip him and laughing. He's doing all of these things. And so I was trying to tell the teacher, you can't have one strategy for the entire class. Because for this particular student, when he doesn't want to do math and you put him in timeout, you just reinforced that. And so again, that behavior is working for him. It's working to make math go away when he doesn't want to do math. And so what I oftentimes tell people is that kids can learn in school whatever we teach them. He could have learned that 2 + 2 was 4 that day, or he could learn that hitting makes the math go away. Either way, he's learning something, it's working for him. And so it could be things like you're asking me to do something too difficult, or they could be saying things like I don't understand what you want. Also, I want a certain thing and I want it now, or sometimes I'm bored, pay attention to me. So these are all things that we can see when we're talking about some of the problem behavior and looking at understanding those messages. There's a rationale for doing the functional assessment. And again, that functional assessment is the piece that we look at, like where we figure out why is this behavior occurring? What is going on that helps us tell that this behavior is communicating because they don't want to do the work and they're escaping, or this behavior is because the little girl's hungry and she wants something to eat. We look at those things. And we know that it can all be kind of boiled down to one thing, is that behaviors are repeated for a reason. They're either to achieve something, or to avoid something, and everything can kind of fit into those things. And so our process is to figure that out. Even if, we don't always have to do that in a formal way. Sometimes the special education teacher and counselor and psych examiner and those people will put a team together and we'll work on understanding what the functional behavior by doing something very formal called a functional behavior assessment, and there's some data that we take. But oftentimes just recognizing in the environment what's going on with the behavior. Do you know that every time the child is disruptive, the teacher sends them out of the room and sends them to the principal's office, and that behavior continues to happen? I would highly think that could possibly be an escape behavior because it's working for them. So we just really have to look at those things when we decide what we're going to do to change behavior. So again, behavior occurs to get something or to avoid something. So again, if we're talking about getting something, it could be attention from teachers, but also peers. We didn't talk about that. Sometimes kids will do things to get the reaction from their peers. I see this especially as kids get a little bit older, or sometimes middle school, high school students. They do things to try to get somebody's attention and a reaction. So we can see that where they're trying to get the teacher's reaction, but also the peers. And that sometimes becomes more difficult because when those peers laugh or give them attention or say things, then that's reinforcing that behavior. But we'll talk about that as a strategy. They could also be trying to get, again, that sensory piece, the little girl that's dropping to the ground and needs to be pulled up. There's other kind of sensory behaviors that we see. Again, sometimes with kids with autism, we'll see them engaging in sensory behaviors where they might be doing some rocking or hand flapping, some of those kinds of things. And it might also be that they're trying to get that preferred activity. It might be that they want the computer and it's not time for the computer, or they didn't earn the computer, and so we see problem behavior. Also, to avoid attention, though, some kids don't want to have the attention or a particular person or the sensory stimulation. So we have kids that might cover their ears because it's too loud in the cafeteria. Well, that behavior could be because that avoids the cafeteria. We take them out. We recognize that that's difficult for them, so we remove them, and that behavior helps work for them. And it could be, again, that undesirable environment that they might be trying to get out of, or getting away from an undesirable person. Again, my example earlier doesn't mean that paraprofessional was doing a bad job, but Tim didn't like her right next to him, so he was trying to get rid of her. What happened is when he was disruptive enough, he would be sent back down to my classroom, and then sometimes he'd say, "Mrs. Bowie, will you help me with the social studies?" And I was, sure, I didn't realize I was reinforcing it. I didn't realize that was helping even more from him to get away from the paraprofessional, because now I was working with them. And that's where you really have to continue to look at, what's going on with these behaviors.